Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Corinthia Benison, founder of Renaissance Center of Mastery. We are a mental health and behavioral health clinic startup, Harlem based. And I have the lovely Eva here joining me again just to talk about mental health and particularly special education. So, Eva, thank you for joining me again and looking forward to continuing our conversation, but narrowing down in on the topic of special education, its process, and wanting to educate the public more about it. So, again, please introduce yourself, let everyone know who you are and what you do.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eva Andrades, and I'm a bilingual school social worker, and I work with the school-based support team, which focuses primarily on doing evaluations and providing the supports for children within the special education system.
Yes, thank you. Eva, let's kind of get into it with the process. A lot of people aren't aware of the process of how students get the services, how the process works with the referral, even from the specialist seeing a neurologist, ENT. There's a lot of things that happen before a kid even gets to school, and sometimes even when they are in school, that requires more attention. And can you just kind of give us more insight on the step-by-step process of how a referral is generated? How is it a determination made that a child needs special needs, and just give us more of insight and background on that.
Glad to. So usually children, a referral can be done, can come about various ways. It could be parent initiated. It could be a medical referral initiated by a pediatrician, or as you mentioned, a neurologist or a psychologist, a therapist, or it can be initiated by the teacher or administration in the school where they see that a child has certain needs and requires more support. So, so before we talk about the evaluation process, the state requires that children receive interventions. They have to, every student has a right to get interventions, tutoring before proceeding to a more complex process, which is an evaluation. And the reason for that is because an IEP is a legal document. And in order to give a student an IEP, the student has to be classified with a disability.
Right.
So as a result of the seriousness of that matter, teachers and schools have certain systems in place to provide tutoring for children early on, and to give them and to provide documentation to the school-based support team, which is a team I'm a part of, as to why they're requesting an evaluation, and that documentation that is required and is supposed to be provided to my team has usually several months of documented interventions. They work in intervals of 6 to 8 weeks. Then everybody sits at the table, everybody meaning the parent and the teacher that are providing the tutoring, to see if the child is progressing. If the child is not progressing in the area, then they can revamp a plan B as far as, let's try this approach, or let's try this program, or this curriculum, or this, whatever the area, the targeted area, and then start another 6 to 8 weeks. So it's a process that usually conveys a series of documentation as to why the child is not progressing. The student is entitled to get the tutoring by someone specialized in the target area. If it's math, by a licensed math teacher. If it's reading, by a reading specialist. And so all that has to be documented. And if the student does not progress, then there's a possibility that there's something else going on. And so then at that point, the parent can request through a letter, an evaluation, or the pediatrician can request it, or the teacher, or the administration in the school can request an eval. Then once the evaluation is requested in writing, let's say it's parent initiated, the school-based support team has 10 days to open the case, have a conversation with the parent, and see what the concerns are. There's several parts to the evaluation. For instance, the team will review the interventions given. A physical is also part of the evaluation because they have to make sure everything's okay, that the student is hearing and it's okay, vision, that there are no physiological possibilities of things that are happening that might be interfering with the student's learning. Then it could also, at that point, a conversation happens with the social worker. So the social worker, which is my role, I'll reach out to a parent and have a conversation about what the concerns are. I'll explain the process, and part of that explanation is I'll let the parent know their rights. So parents have a lot of rights, including the rights to proceed with an evaluation or to not, to change their mind at any point. Parents also have a right to request more tutoring for their child, intervention. Parents have the rights to get their child independently evaluated outside of the Department of Education. And then they have a right to share that evaluation or not. So under HIPAA law, they're not mandated or forced to do so. Parents also can have a right to be in disagreement with the district recommendations. They have a right to an impartial hearing. They have a right to mediation between the school and the parent regarding the child's education. So there's several rights that parents have. After I explain that, I go over the 13 disability classifications. So there are 13
Can I ask you a question? I'm sorry to interject before you get into the classification. Sorry, I'm having feedback. Um, now, would you say that there is a difference between the origin of the referral? So you gave an example about a parent-initiated referral. Is there a difference in the approach with a physician evaluation that has a diagnosis, that has, the encounter notes and everything presented to the school? Is there a different approach versus a parent, initiating the referral, would you say? Or
Well, it's really mostly not much as far as the different approach. We would do the same process, which is
right,
like the parent will submit a letter and say, for instance, the pediatrician, I'll give you an example. The pediatrician wants my child to be evaluated for speech and language delays. So the parent will provide the letter and from the doctor, and then they can write a letter requesting, I'm requesting an evaluation for my child. I would like to request a speech eval as recommended by the pediatrician. With that parent letter, we can open the case. And then part of the evaluation would be that we would also request a speech evaluation for the student. With evaluations that are parent initiated, for instance, part of the rights of a parent too is to also say, I don't want to do any more interventions for my child. I know my child has a disability. My child is struggling. I don't want to waste another few months, and I want to, I'm requesting an eval, and the parent has the right.
right. Is there, so when a parent declines an IEP, there is a 504. Now, are parents aware of the differentiation between that? Do you explain that as well? Or,
Sometimes they are, mostly they're not. 504s have been used. I mean, we've had cases where 504s were used for instance, for busing, for children that are asthmatic, air conditioned buses. We've had them for medication so that children can get medication in schools. It is an option that parents have, but for the most part, parents want their children evaluated because they also want to know, they know that they can have the child evaluated, and even after the process is done, which takes about 60 days, at the end, we have the IEP meeting, and at that meeting, they still can choose to proceed or not proceed. So, because there's a consent form that needs to be signed, let's say the child is found eligible, then the parent has even that choice to provide the services in school or not. If we have, sometimes we have children that have speech delays, and the parent might say, you know what, I don't want an IEP. I don't want him to get services in school. I found the clinic in my community. I'm going to take him Saturday mornings. So no more, and the child has been through a full evaluation. The parent gets copies of all of the evaluations, and it's up to them. It's their choice as to whether to consent for services in school or not.
Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, you can go into the 13 areas definitely.
Okay. Yeah, so there's 13 disability classifications, and they are autism, deafness, deaf blindness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, learning disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, or a visual impairment. So for a child to get an IEP, to be offered an IEP, they have to first meet the criteria, and then we have to sit down at that meeting with the parent and the evaluators and determine which one of these 13 classifications applies.
Yeah. And when you and over that time of the observation, is there a specific time frame usually outside of the 60 days that you observe the child and see how they're progressing, and you kind of gauge, right? I mean, depending on the child, right? Depending on the category the child is in. So if you're talking about autism and, they needed more attention with math, like what would that approach be, and how collaborative is it based on the teacher versus the parent? I mean, I kind of want to get more insight to like what that meeting is actually, what's
Sure.
discussed. Yeah.
So when we get to the IEP meeting, by the time we have the IEP meeting, certain things have already occurred. The child has been evaluated by the psychologist. He's had a full psychoeducational. That includes everything from vocabulary, math, memory, cognition, executive functioning. The child has also had a classroom observation, which is done by either the psychologist or the social worker inside the classroom of the current classroom of the student. And the child has also, the parent and the social worker have met for a social history evaluation, which is what I do. That meeting can be anywhere within an hour to two, depending on how much information the parent has. By the time we get to the IEP meeting, let's say the parent also wanted a speech eval. So we made a request, we got consent. I get consent during the social history evaluation with the parent. After I get consent, I put in for, let's say my mother is requesting a speech evaluation, somebody's contracted to come in and do the speech eval. And then the report is submitted to the team. We're sitting at the table, parent is invited to the meeting, and it's also told she or he can bring anyone they like for support. And so we open the meeting with the parent rights. So before we start anything, I review what I reviewed earlier, all the parent rights. After that, we go right into the meeting. The psychologist will review all the findings of the eval. And then together with the teacher, we will create a plan. If the child is found eligible, we will create an IEP for that child, which would include areas of support. If it's math, depending on what the numbers were, what were the results of the findings, we will work with the team at the school, which would also include the IEP teacher of that building, where everybody will suggest that let's give in this amount of period of math, or this amount of period of social studies, or this amount of periods of reading, and so it's a team collaboration. So everybody's at the table, and everybody's voice counts, especially mom and dad, grandma, grandpa.
Yeah. And is the approach or just the customization of the resources and what needs to happen varied across the category? So if we say we have a child that has more of an emotional disturbance versus autism, or how is that a different, obviously it's a different conversation, but is it more challenging, would you say,
It's a
for children
different
that's not?
classification. So
Yeah,
if we have an IEP with a child with the disability classification of autism, depending on there's children that are very high function with autism
right.
who
Hmm.
can be placed in an ICT setting, for instance, that's an integrated co-teaching setting. That's a classroom with two teachers, a special education teacher and a general education teacher. So
Hmm.
it really the child drives the recommendation. The needs of the child drive the recommendation and the supports required.
Okay.
We
I
create
used
an
yeah.
IEP for the child's needs,
Hmm.
not
So
like school building or it's supposed to be focused on what the student needs.
yeah, so when going into the categories, what I was saying is a child that has emotional disturbance, do you find that a lot of students fall in multiple categories, or there's really isolated, a specific category that a child would, way
So
more? Like, does it vary a lot
so we
from case
have,
to
for
case in
instance,
your experience?
there is a disability classification of emotional disturbance.
Right.
Um, and that can that is so broad
Hmm.
it could mean a lot of things. So
Right.
like I don't want to give like a specific example because it's so broad as far as what how is the child presenting, the
Hmm.
trauma, is it, what it the level of trauma, what's going on, where's the child living at the moment,
Hmm.
are we do we have a child that is currently in the foster care system, do we have a child that is currently living in some sort of shelter,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty
So it looks like those categories overlap. It's not something that a child just falls into one category. It's like there could really be a diagnosis, but the categories could be more than one or two or three, multiple,
yes,
essentially,
it could
right?
be multiple, right? Which
Yeah,
is one of the categories that's called multiple disabilities. So it could
yeah,
overlap. Usually, when that happens, we'll go with the category that is presenting the most need.
yeah,
So if it's, let's say we have a child who was recommended for speech services, but the psychologist also found him to have a learning disability, at the meeting, we'll decide which one of those two classifications, whether it's speech and language impaired or learning disability, which one applies more, depending
yeah,
on which area of support he's going to need. Like,
yeah,
so that's a conversation and that's where the parents' view is so important, as well as the clinicians that did the eval.
yeah.
And the
Do you find that? Okay, go ahead.
no, and the teachers.
Oh, I was gonna say, do you find that parents are more inclined to do their own evaluation outside of the Board of Ed, or they would, have their child be evaluated or get second opinions? Is that very popular in your
So,
experience?
so second opinions, they can, that is a parent right, and they can do that at any point. What I'm finding now, since the pandemic, is that more children are getting evaluated through the Department of Education versus independent evaluations because we're faster. Our time frame is shorter and faster, and some evaluations outside can take, there's a waiting list of 2 years, I've been told by parents. And the
Oh,
Department of Education, we're a lot faster than that. So, and apparently that's been the case now since the pandemic.
okay. We have some questions coming in here. All right, let's see. Do you find any differences in the evaluations of children of poverty and BIPOC children?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
It says, do you find any differences in the evaluations of children in poverty or BIPOC children?
What would the BIPOC stand for?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that acronym is.
Okay.
But I would say maybe children in poverty, or you could answer the first part.
So children
Black,
of
indigenous, people of color.
Black, indigenous people. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Um, I work the population I work mostly with um, is some two of my schools are mostly like African American, Black and Brown communities, African American, and Hispanics, Latino children. Because I'm a Latino, because I'm a bilingual clinician, I'm placed in a cluster where we're servicing. I service a mostly bilingual school, one of them. So I haven't had my students are mostly fall within those two groups. Yes, as far as poverty, there's a lot of talk and research that says that because that the children are lacking equity and when it comes to those issues like uh, receiving the supports they need. Um, Personally, I find that the Department of Education has really done a lot, has come a long way with the provision and even the training. We're constantly in training, and even part of our training is not just clinical. I would say that within the last decade, there's been a lot of training on implicit biases, on the issues of race, gender, even, why were so many of our Black and brown boys in the system, and, and categorized a certain way, like emotionally disturbed. And so there's been a lot of training even on culturally sensitivity. So kudos to the Department of Education for that. There's just a lot of awareness now, and that training is not just for clinicians, but the teachers too. There's a lot of more knowledge, sensitivity to these issues, culturally sensitive approaches to the children and learning and the social emotional learning now too. So um, I feel that we're working towards um, adjusting and eliminating really those gaps.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a testament to you saying just even comparing the turnaround time, which is a way to kind of build the trust. So, while a lot of people prefer second opinions or private assessments, to for the DOE to come in and have that turnaround to make sure that well, you could, it is a choice for you to go get a second opinion or seek another provider. But if that turnaround time is 2 years, your child is in limbo. You're not getting any answers for that time. So it could be um, kind of maybe depending on the parent and depending on the needs of the child, could be frustrating because a parent may, want to have that second opinion or have outside evaluations and they cannot, and sometimes they're left to only the decision of the Board of Education. And that could be detrimental, depending on the circumstances. So I think it is a lot that parents are facing when they do have a child that requires an evaluation and they're limited. And a lot of times those limits are due to insurance. It really ties back into, your socioeconomic status and your availability and access to care, whether it's a neurologist, whether it's a speech language pathologist, whether it's an ENT doctor for, speech delays, trying to catch things as early on as possible. And so that's definitely a huge burden for parents to, again, not have access and then even finding time, even researching, right? All those things a parent is responsible for doing. And, they want to see their child progress and get their needs met, but it's a huge, huge problem that's that is outside of the Board of Ed's control as well. So it's yeah, it's a lot. And again, for people of color, um, depending on your insurance, dictates your access in a lot of cases. And if you are going to a clinic in a community, yeah, for neurology, those appointments are 60 minutes. you'll get an appointment, your appointment right now, some institutions are already booked into next year, spring. So if you could imagine you have an issue that you discover with your child, you could be waiting a year for an answer. And that is, a lose-lose situation to be, dealing with when it comes to turnaround time. So definitely, that's a huge plus for the Board of Ed to see that need, to see that gap and fill it. But it could be, from a parental perspective, and even the trust could be something that, it still could be frustrating from a parent's perspective for their child and having options. Oh, Eva, I think you're on mute. Sorry. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think that the key with trust is empowerment, empowering parents, letting them know their voice matters, that they have choices.
Yeah.
Even with an IEP, at any point, parents can, let's say they don't proceed, at any point they can request an evaluation as long as they put it in writing at any point during the course of the year. And let's say in a case where a student is offered an IEP and parent signs consent, the parent has the right to request a re-eval at any point within that year. So let's say a student gets an IEP in June, and now it's ready for September of the next school year. And by October, November, mom is concerned or dad is concerned that some of the child's needs are not being met. They don't have to wait for the annual review. And an annual review is because IEPs are reviewed every year with the teacher to see how the child is doing, to see if the child is meeting the goals that were set by the team. So, but parents are not limited to an annual review. At any point, they can write and say, I have concerns. Example, I don't think my child's in the right setting. I don't think my child's getting the support he needs. And they put it in writing, and the case gets open within 10 days. So we work with compliance dates in the Department of Education as well. So there's a compliance date for every process, an annual, a mandated 3 year. We also have mandated 3 year revals, where after every 3 years, the team goes back in if they need to retest, see where the child is, see how the child is progressing. Because the goal is, one of the goals is that to eventually help the child receive enough support that he might not require the need of special education services, because it's a service now. I think I mentioned in our last meeting, it used to be back decades ago, it used to be a place, right? That mentality is a place. So now it's more of a service to help support the child. And so some children will continually progress, and sometimes they'll get declassified. They won't need anymore.
Yeah. And do you find that the declassification, does that happen frequently, or do you, in your experience, has IEPs, a child be given an IEP and that's kind of been a long-term versus a short-term outcome, since it
No.
is more considered a service? Because I
Yes.
think the stigma around the IEP and special education is like once you're in special ed, you're in special ed, and that's it, and I think that is another educational piece, and I'm glad we're talking about this
Mhm.
because some people are under the assumption that it's not reversible. Like once you get that label, you're kind of you're categorized as that, and if you graduate and receive a diploma, you're still labeled as, it's just a label that I think is another stigma as well. And a lot of, I mean, for me, I've always thought that kind of special education, it wasn't something that you could reverse or like get out of. And just my growing up, we thought that just was a category and you was in that category.
But it also, so let's think about that, right? It also
Yeah.
depends on what is your disability
Ability.
classification.
Right.
Because there's some disability classifications, for instance, autism
Hmm.
versus speech and language impairment. So it also depends a lot on that.
Yeah.
As far as to your question, have I seen a lot of the classifications? we've had our share of children being declassified, children that have progressed and have done well. We've also had our share of children going from D75 schools to community schools. And because they're progressing well, not just academically, emotionally, also we've had cases where children have gone from an emotionally disturbed classification to disability classification of like um, a learning disability,
Mhm.
or children that have gone. So I mean, it's so varied. Like I work with elementary babies, so the children,
Yeah.
they're always the babies to us, and we see them growing. Kids are constantly maturing and growing, and they're so resilient, even when it comes to trauma. So if they get the support they need, and it's a good support, and it's effective and consistent, yeah, we've seen children make great progress. If we hadn't or didn't believe that it was possible, we wouldn't be. I don't think we would be doing this work.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And so, with the coordination of care and the resources, I mean, does the school function as the hub of all the resources, or are a lot of the resources directed externally when it comes to whether it's therapy, whether it's additional counseling or additional educational support? Does the school provide those resources immediately, or you're giving more of like a referral call? This organization or this other place will be a continuum.
So I personally like to give a lot of community referrals because
Mhm.
I I just think my approaches to me, it should be that kind of comprehensive approach of school and community.
Mhm.
Um, so I like to do that. So I have like a list of resources I give parents, or referrals I make with parents doing social history. So, but that, I mean, that's something that I like doing. And I also ask my parents for advice on good programs that they're happy with in the community, and they're happy to share. So, and I'll share that with the parents. But as far as, for instance, like when we're creating the IP, and let's say a child needs speech therapy, the school will be providing that, depending on what the mandated, what's recommended by the therapist that evaluated the child. Let's say they want the child to have speech services twice a week for 30 minutes, one in a group of three. So all of that will go in the IEP, and the student will be getting the services within the school. So the
Okay.
parent won't have to take that child. If they choose to consent, they won't have to pull the child out or take them on weekends for speech. The child will get it within the school system and within the building.
Okay. And it's like that for psychologists as well and other supportive therapy services. They offer that
Yeah,
within the school. Okay.
right.
Mhm.
So since the IEP is a legal document, whatever is recommended in the IEP, the student has to get.
Right.
So the building and the school is has to provide that.
Okay. If the parent wanted to or had the access to do everything and took their own siloed approach and took your recommendations and saying, I will do this externally, and report, would they be responsible for reporting to the school?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
If a parent chooses not to consent, they're
Hmm.
not obligated to share any evaluations with the team or the school. Um, if they choose to handle this internally within their family, and let's say they're doing counseling outside, at the Astor Center, for instance, an example, just they don't have to involve the school in that. I mean, it's up to them to share, and we love to work, as a team, but that's the
Right.
parents' choice and right.
Okay. And have you seen, so if a parent took on that approach, have you seen that approach still have a positive outcome? A parent doing things outside of the school's, control or jurisdiction, and a child still
Oh,
progressing and
absolutely.
getting those needs. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. That's good. But I think, for parents, I could imagine just the work and the effort, it would take to coordinate care and streamline services for their child, and especially in communities that have scarce resources. It's very challenging. But I think the school, like I said, the school building the trust of the community and the families that they serve is everything. And I think that approach, like you said, has been producing positive outcomes, and I think it should be replicated across other school systems if your school is doing it. I'm sure others are. But yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. Like you were even talking about, funding and access of funds and having the proper staff. And would you say there's any missing pieces or any way of improving the what has been put in place in your school? Do you think there's other hats that could be, or just positions that could be open more to meet the needs of the students, especially post COVID, um, in the school setting?
Well, we definitely, I'll speak to the piece that is within the line of work I do. We can
Mhm.
definitely use more clinicians. We need more psychologists and social workers, and we need a lot more bilingual personnel
Yeah.
because
Do
we
you
have.
yeah, when you do have that language barrier, I mean, do you have like the interpreter services? Do you have a third party come in and, and is that comfortable, more uncomfortable for the client or the family, do you think? Do you see like there's a disconnect with that, or is it more personable, when you speaking Spanish, versus having a third party, interpret and whatnot?
So as far as uncomfortability, a lot of it also depends on the interpreter you get.
Mm,
So that's one point with that. As far as the language I speak, I feel that a lot of parents are always asked what is their dominant language, and then what language would they like to communicate, and what language would they like to get their any kind of paperwork. And and when I work with uh, families that speak Spanish, it does create sort of a bond, the bond that language creates when you find someone that kind of speaks your language, whether it's a linguistic language or language based on experience and sentiment and views, and there's that connection. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. I definitely, in my experience with healthcare, it's been a huge sometimes when patients have you get someone that speaks Mandarin or Russian, and you're kind of like, okay, and trying to really deliver the same exact care, and it takes longer, and but you definitely, it is to meet the needs and the comfortability of the patient, and you want great interpreting services. So yes, we do need more bilingual, multilingual clinicians across the board in most healthcare environments. But yeah,
And
it's
you're
just
also
a
meeting that's
huge
their right.
debate. What's that?
It's also a right that people have
Yeah,
to
it
speak
is a right.
in their language, whatever language
Hmm.
they feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is another patient experience that is definitely needs more attention to. And when we talk about even tying that to cultural competency, I could have an interpreter interpret every form of communication with my provider, but sometimes too, you want to see someone of your ethnic background or of ethnicity or race. So that's another like twofold, you know, issue, nonetheless, especially depending on the services and the extent of your needs.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's still work to be done in that respect. Um, and I would say, from your experience with special education, um, is this something that you see yourself doing? Is this it for you as far as this is your passion and what you want to do in your field?
Um, I'm also interested in working with, creating my own practice and working with immigrant communities. That's like a passion for me.
Wow.
So yeah, that's something that part of my future goals.
Yeah, that's
So
amazing. I think that's a new I guess outlook for clinicians now, especially social workers and licensed clinical social workers. I've spoken to a few that are very, that have their own practice and do are inspired to, provide services personally and get away from, working for someone. So I think it's definitely empowering on both sides, especially, getting that experience being a special education teacher, um, working for the school system, and then starting off and having a private practice. I think it's different, and I think a lot of families will be drawn to more private practicing practitioners in that space. I think again it kind of goes back to trust and having a separate approach to individuals and families' needs. So I definitely think that is definitely changing the healthcare ecosystem as far as therapeutic services, and it gives, individuals a different outlook when someone's having their own private practice and being able to seek out their provider. And they'll picking you, right? Eva having a private practice. I think it's rewarding, and you could have your, freedom of how you want to serve your clients and what you would like to offer, and using all your knowledge and insight. So I definitely see that growing amongst LMSWs and LCSWs alike, and their pursuits of being, a private practitioner. So that's great. Do you have any closing statements or wanting to share anything more about the categories or just your experience and what you would like families and individuals to know more about special education and things that we don't know um, about it, just more informational and educational pieces that we may have not addressed?
well, there's two things. The first thing I would like to just reiterate the importance of an IEP, that it is a legal document, and that once an IEP is created for your child, if a parent chooses to put the child in a different school, including a charter school or private school, that student has the rights to get those services. That's another area where the Department of Education makes sure that the training and licensure necessary is there for those providing those services. And so just encouraging my parents to make sure that if you choose to put your child in another school, that's your choice and your decision. But know that if your child has an IEP and it's been created for your child, your baby has the rights to get those services. And schools should figure out privately or whatever schools they choose, other schools that they need to really meet the needs of that student.
I have a Yeah, I have a question about that. So one school generates the I. So if a parent got the IEP from one school, that IEP travels with them to any school they put their child in, or they don't. The school doesn't redo the process. They have to take that evaluation from the original school and meet those needs.
Yes, so the school, as far as redoing the process, a parent has a right to request a re-eval at any
Yeah.
point. But let's say little Johnny's gonna go next year to another school that is not a Department of Education school, that IEP goes with that. As long as the parent presents that and makes that available, because we don't share the systems, right? Because
Right.
we work from a system called CSIS, um, special education student information system, and not, we're not going to have that same platform in private schools. But as long as the father, the parent, mom, dad, guardian, foster parents make that IEP available to that school where the child is going, those services, they're a right. That's the right of the student to have. So I just want to emphasize that not to feel like they have to settle
Yeah.
for less for their babies. And then the second comment was, you know, I, 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 I couldn't end this talk without just um, saying that we're grieving right now as a nation over what's happened.
Yeah.
in Texas, and I didn't grow up as a child ever imagining or thinking that violence would come to my school
Yeah.
or my church
Mhm.
or the
Me neither.
supermarket shop.
Hmm.
So our babies are dealing with a lot. It's a different monster altogether, so to speak, what they're
Yeah.
processing, what they're hearing. And then that coupled with the access to social media that our children have now that we didn't grow up with,
Yeah.
it's a concern.
It
It's a
is.
concern when it comes to mental health, which I know is part of the goals of your organization.
Mhm.
And just really helping us turn as a nation and shift and focus on what mental health really is and the importance of
Yeah.
it. You know, because it could seem so invisible, but it really kind of rules and runs everything. Because if you're not feeling up to it, if a high schooler is not up to it, he's not going to go to school. She's not going to go to school. They can look perfectly fine, but if they're dealing with mental health issues, if little children are growing up and those needs are not being met, and it's a comprehensive approach. It's everybody, all
Yeah.
hands on board. The schools, the communities, the churches, parents, grandparents, friends, you know,
Yeah.
legislation, politicians. And that's a hot mess,
It's like everybody's responsible, and accountable. I definitely agree with you. Growing up, a lot of the violence you felt like was outside. Like school was supposed to be safe, and now I couldn't imagine, just the anxiety of parents and students alike with not being comfortable. You're not, I I can't really articulate it in a way, but it's it's like America, we have to address this as a sickness. I mean, for us to have just mass shootings after mass shootings, and even the streets of New York where I'm from, the violence is just, I mean, it's out of control. I mean, we're talking about every week now, we're witnessing shootings. You got ghost guns, you got 3D, it's just so much turmoil, and it's sick. It's like we have to do something about this, and we have to be in a more preventative, and not reactional. We're reacting to so much, and we're not preventing enough. So yeah, my heart and prayers go out to the families of
yes,
those victims, and every victim to violence and senseless violence, um, this year and beyond. And we have to do a lot more than we've been doing. Like you said, it is a comprehensive approach, all the way from the policymakers that make the big decisions down to, the social worker, the teacher, the parent. Um, and, you know, it's been a heavy, heavy few days with this Texas massacre, and even the Buffalo. It's just it's across the country. We're all facing the same thing.
yes,
Um,
we're all
yeah,
grieving, and like you said, our hearts and prayers are with the families
yeah,
in Texas and in Buffalo and throughout our nation. Years, I mean, I can't even imagine the type of triggers this causes, even
yeah,
for victims and relatives, and you know, um,
yeah,
just and having personally lost a family member to gun violence last year, it is it just it just triggers you at a different level. I mean,
yeah,
we need to do something. We need to um, demand change. We need to, let our voices be heard to the powers that be. This isn't a
yeah.
political issue. This is a human issue, and it
It
needs to
is.
be addressed. And so we just pray and hope and and fight. We,
Yeah,
we're not going to take it. We're not settling. This is not going to
yeah.
be the new
this is not a new normal. No, right. We're not going to get, yeah. There's no, exactly. And I think too, I think we're kind of been conditioned and customized to just digest, this and, and not really fix it. And I think it's like we have to act now. Like, we have to really do the work. We have to make these communities better. We have to invest in young people. We have to provide services, or we're going to have another generation you know, of violence, of mass incarceration, of just negative outcomes where, you know, we're going just spiraling down. Um, and so, yeah, the time is now. I think, social media, we have to kind of reverse all the negative, right? We got to use the platforms to speak out, just like, platforms are used to push so much garbage out. We have to fight and have a positive voice and stand against all the negativity, all the evilness, all of it. And, you know, let's all come together
Yes.
and really push change. And this is a crucial time in history. And what we do now is going to set the tone for the next decade, for the next 50, 100 years, and the outcomes in America. And it comes down to everyone really having a right to be well. And there's a lot of broken things in the system that we have to fix, or things are going to stay broken and society is going to stay, stagnant, and we're not going to move forward. So, thank you, Eva, for just, weighing in again and educating the public on special education. I learned a lot this evening. I had a lot of just preconceptions about the process, about what special education means for individuals just growing up, and never really took the time to really learn about the process, learn about both sides of how this care and service is implemented. And so, thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge. I hope everyone learned a bit tonight about that process and being more sensitive to the process and the individuals involved. Um, and
My
and,
pleasure. Thank
yes,
you for having me.
thank you. Okay. I guess we don't have any other comments in the comment section. And I mean, I just have one thing to ask. Any solutions, Eva, that you would offer just families, individuals who may, or parents who may not even know how to go about doing an evaluation or even coming forward to actually know their child actually has a need? Is that a thing too, where sometimes parents kind of maybe miss or don't really see things until after the fact? Is that been disclosed? Because
Yeah,
I know some parents, they work, they're busy, they kind of maybe overlook some of the issues they see with their child, and they're, maybe they have their own kind of guilt or denial, maybe if they're not engaging their child regularly or noticing things.
my advice is to have a conversation.
Okay.
Have a conversation with the teacher. Have a conversation with the social worker. Have
Hmm.
a conversation with administration, someone that you feel comfortable with in the school. And it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to wonder. It's okay to talk to your pediatrician. Talk to the
Hmm.
doctor, maybe. And even if your pediatrician might miss something, it's happened. And the parent
Yeah.
will be like, I know he says she's fine, but something's off or something is
Right.
this. Trust your instincts because parents are experts in their children too. That's why
Right.
their voice they
Yeah.
can pick up. They live with the babies day in and day out. So don't invalidate your own intuition and your own feelings about what you might be thinking or your opinion. Your opinion
Hmm.
is valuable.
Right. That's great advice. I think, just kind of thinking outside the box from a parent perspective. Sometimes too, that happens where you're not, you could communicate more. And it's even good to over communicate. I think, and sometimes when you're trying to figure out the root of an issue, the root of a cause, or identifying a need of a child, um, I think over communication is the key now, in figuring out, solutions and meeting the needs of your child. So thank you, Eva, for that advice. Um, And I'm trying to just be here. We touched over everything. Um, is there any services that you want to maybe recommend, even outside of the Board of Ed, that you may want to just put out there for parents to maybe even research or look into if they're, have a child that has special needs or a child that is in special education? Just more informative
It
resources.
depends on, it depends on where you live. Feel
Hmm.
free to call 311. You can give your zip code depending on what your needs are, or what kind of services you're looking for. I am glad to see that there is a lot more mental health uh, emphasis now. So even through insurances, I had even heard that medical insurances are even waiving the copays, because of the pandemic. So feel free to call. Usually the cards in the back will have a separate 800 number or 888 number, and it will say something like behavioral sciences or behavioral health, and that has to do more with therapy. Also, therapy can now be provided right in the comfort of your home. So maybe if you feel like I don't have time to go to a place and sit there, um, you can now do it right from your home. So just keep that in mind. 45-minute session, even for, again, parents, you have a lot on your plate. You got a lot on your plate. So
Yeah.
part of self-care, I believe, is also taking care of yourself and having that therapeutic break once, twice a month, whatever you feel your need is, and just having that conversation. And it also helps take the stigma off it by saying, you know what, I need I need to do a few months of sessions. I need to do this. I need to do that. That's part of treating yourself, and you deserve it, and you have a right to it.
Yeah. That's great advice. I think it's like really making the time. I think about how busy parents are, how much they're juggling. And yeah, it is a task to pause and, evaluate and then make the time for yourself and for your children to get the services you need. So that is actually great advice.
Yes,
To,
put the oxygen mask first on you, mom, dad, and then
yeah,
you can take care of your baby.
yes, yeah. Okay, so I'm Corinthia Benison. Again, thank you all for listening. I hope you, like myself, learned a lot this evening. Just talking about special education as it relates to mental health. I am again founder of Renaissance Center of Mastery, RCM for short, and please follow us at our Instagram page and Facebook page, RCMX Social Justice, and please feel free to visit our website at rcmxsocialjustice.com. And Eva, take it away. Good. Just let
Thank you
everyone
so
know who you are.
much.
Mhm.
Guys, be well, be safe, and be blessed.
Thank you. Hearts and prayers go out to all families of the Texas victims. Our prayers are with you and stay strong. And thank you again for everyone listening in. And we'll be back next week, same time, same place at 7 p.m. Thank you, Black News USA. You all have a blessed evening. Take care.
Thank you.